Okay, let's dive into this article. It's titled State, the Hizmet Movement, and the True Solution, a rebuttal to Gökhan Bacık, and it's by Hasan Tarık Şen.
Right.
Our mission for this deep dive is, well, to take you through the key arguments, the perspective Şen presents in this specific piece. We want to help you understand his viewpoint on Hizmet and the situation in Turkey.
And Shane really frames this right at the start. He calls it a moral reckoning from within the Hizmet movement. He talks about his own long history with it, starting young, age 14, voluntary work, his legal career, academic stuff. He's very clear this is meant as a sincere account written from within, aimed at, engaging with the ideas.
Gotcha. And it's crucial context, like you said, that this is specifically a rebuttal. It's responding directly to Gökhan Bacık's analysis and the reconciliation ideas Bacık proposed.
Exactly.
So think of this as us guiding you point by point through Şen's response, highlighting the specific details and arguments he makes.
Yeah, we're here to unpack Şen's perspective as he lays it out in this article.
Okay, so let's start with a really big one. Şen tackles early on this comparison that's sometimes made between the PKK and Hizmet. Şen argues this comparison is, and he uses strong words, profoundly flawed, both legally and morally.
Yeah, he really draws a sharp contrast there. He points out, look, the PKK is internationally seen as an armed terrorist organization.
Right.
Whereas he describes Hizmet as a peaceful, volunteer-based civil movement focused on education. So, fundamentally different things, in his view, based on their methods and goals.
And he adds some detail on the legal cases against Hizmet members, or his view of them anyway. According to Şen in the article, these cases usually involve things he calls non-violent actions, like making bank deposits or using digital platforms.
Right. Not exactly armed conflict stuff.
He uses that to kind of bolster his point that the activities just don't line up with terrorism.
And then, to sort of counter that PKK comparison even more and maybe suggest other ways forward, he brings up these international examples.
Yeah, this part's quite interesting. He uses these cases to build his argument. Like Norway, their November 2024 apology and proposals based on a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for Sami, Griven, and Forest Finn groups.
And Australia, too. Their 2008 apology and the programs for the stolen generations.
Right.
Şen uses these to basically say, look, peaceful, restorative justice between states and civil communities is possible. It doesn't have to be framed through the lens of armed conflict.
Okay, so after setting up that contrast, Şen's article then gets into his description of Hizmet's nature and its history with the state. He's really pushing back against this idea of it being secretive or clandestine.
Yeah, he presents Hizmet as neither secretive nor militarized. He keeps emphasizing his view that it's been a peaceful and transparent movement.
And he gives some specific examples from the past, at least according to the source, to back this up. Like he says, government officials once attended the opening ceremonies of Hizmet-affiliated schools abroad, and that teachers worked with the state to serve society.
Right. And a key point he makes is that people accused of being this clandestine structure were, in Şen's view, actually part of state-supported education initiatives.
He also throws in his claim that the main July 15 narrative, the official story around the coup attempt, is still, according to him, riddled with contradictions and unresolved questions.
And he also brings up the background of some leaders, pointing out that many were, as he puts it, former high-ranking state officials, respected academics, and internationally accomplished professionals.
Seems like he's using that to sort of challenge the image of some hidden, shadowy group.
Exactly.
So what this section really does, for you listening, is offer Şen's specific counter-narrative. It's his take on the movement's history, its relationship with the state, directly challenging those official claims of secrecy by pointing to past cooperation and the public nature of many members as he sees it.
Okay, so moving on from the nature of the movement itself, Şen really takes aim at Gökhan Bacık's approach and the tone of his analysis.
Right. He talks about Bacık's call for Hizmet to be dissolved. Şen sees this as having a totalitarian undertone, and he argues it sets a dangerous precedent, potentially threatening other civil groups too. His argument is basically that the state should scrutinize individuals under the law, not just dismantle whole communities.
And he's pretty direct about Bacık's language too. Şen points to terms like mediocre leaders, those who speak with jinn, even those who can't find a toilet.
Wow.
And calls it derogatory language. He argues it's more like defamation than academic inquiry, saying it just dismisses the movement's complexities and makes baseless claims.
He even uses a specific anecdote, doesn't he, about the Avant platform.
Yeah, he presents this as a historical example where, in his telling, Hizmet encouraged intellectual freedom, welcomed different views, including Bacık's own back then.
Oh, okay.
And he uses this to suggest Bacık's current stance is inconsistent, maybe even shows a lack of gratitude.
So it's not just about the tone, he also questions the academic side.
Definitely. Şen argues Bacık's article just lacks the academic rigor one would expect. He specifically mentions, no sources, no conceptual precision, no data analysis. Şen feels the line between critique and just emotional venting becomes blurred, and that the accusatory tone without documentation doesn't meet scholarly ethical standards in his view.
But here's where it gets, I think, really pointed. Amidst all this critique of method and tone, Şen argues that any critique that ignores the current suffering of members abroad is, quote, both off-target and morally injurious.
Yeah, he really draws a line there. It's like he's saying the human cost is crucial context that Bacık is missing or ignoring.
And picking up right on that point about the people in exile, Şen pushes back really hard against this claim he attributes to Bacık that exiled members have gotten too comfortable. Şen says that view is both unfair and uninformed.
Right. He goes on to describe what he sees as the reality. He talks about people who crossed rivers and seas under life-threatening conditions who lived in refugee camps.
Not exactly comfortable.
No. And he says they're now working in all sorts of roles, from academia to manual labor. He's painting a picture of real hardship, ongoing struggle.
And he emphasizes their continued activities too, right? Saying, despite everything, they continue to provide scholarships, lobby for human rights, and support meaningful reform.
Exactly. He wants to show they're still engaged, still working for their cause.
And Şen offers an explanation for maybe why they might seem quiet sometimes. He says it's not born of comfort, but of emotional exhaustion and trauma. So he's really trying to reframe that whole perception of what life is like for exiled members.
Yeah, this whole section is clearly designed to paint a very, very different picture from the one Şen says Bacık presents. It emphasizes suffering, resilience, continued commitment under really tough circumstances.
Okay, so Şen has made his contrasts, given his view of history, critiqued Bacık. But he doesn't just leave it there, right? He actually proposes his own solution or path forward.
That's right. He lays out some very specific steps he thinks the state needs to take for a genuine solution.
What are they?
Well, things like immediate termination of unjust legal proceedings, the return of confiscated properties and educational institutions, plus compensation.
Okay.
Also, the reversal of passport cancellations, travel bans, and dismissals. And importantly, an official state apology. Pretty concrete demands.
And he tries to ground this in Turkish history itself.
He does. He points to the 1950s when confiscated properties were returned to minority groups. He suggests this precedent of moral courage should guide us again. Like it's been done before.
Interesting. But it's not just about state action for Şen, is it? He talks about where true renewal comes from.
No, exactly. He argues it doesn't come from elitist reform, but from the conscience, sincerity, and solidarity of ordinary people, the grassroots level.
And he gives examples of that.
Yeah, things he feels get overlooked, like teachers opening schools in Africa, tradesmen building institutions, and mothers funding scholarships from modest means.
Right.
His point is that ignoring this grassroots energy makes any top-down solution spiritually and practically inadequate.
So if renewal comes from the grassroots and conscience, who does Şen think Bacık should have been appealing to?
Well, Şen says the real appeal shouldn't just be aimed at the movement's leaders, but at Turkish civil society. He specifically names academics, opinion leaders, and media figures.
And he has some strong words for their silence, doesn't he?
He does. He calls their silence on the whole situation a historic test. And he suggests, particularly for Muslim intellectuals, that this silence might not just be waiting, but maybe a calculated withdrawal into socio-political convenience. Oof.
That's quite a charge.
It is. And his concluding thought really wraps up this idea of shared responsibility.
Rust.
Peace is achieved not only through state authority, but also through the conscience of society.
Okay, so let's quickly recap the core arguments Hasan Tarık Şen presents in this rebuttal article we've been unpacking.
Sure.
First, that stark contrast he draws between Hizmet and the PKK. Then, his detailed critique of Bacık's arguments, questioning both the academic rigor and the moral basis, as Şen sees it.
Right. And the strong emphasis on the suffering and ongoing efforts of exiled members, countering any claims they're comfortable.
And finally, those clear steps he proposes for state-led justice, but also that powerful call for Turkish civil society for individuals to engage their conscience.
Absolutely. And understanding this specific perspective, Shen's perspective from within the Hizmet movement as he presents it here, really adds important nuance for you trying to grasp this complex situation.
Yeah, definitely. And here's maybe something interesting for you to think about further. Shen ends by saying, just peace is achieved not only through state authority, but also through the conscience of society. So given everything he argues in the article, what does that imply about the balance of responsibility he places? How much rests on institutions like the state versus how much rests on individuals in civil society in actually healing these deep divisions?